Mercedes just dominated the first two races of the 2026 season. Australia, China, 2-1-2 finishes. A gap so big, it doesn't make sense this early in a new era. But now, everything is starting to unravel. Because new evidence has just been revealed. And it points to something hidden. Something inside the engine that only shows its true power under real race conditions. Heat, pressure, full load. Exactly where no one was looking. And here's why this is massive. Rival teams are no longer guessing. They're connecting the data. Sector by sector. Straight by straight. And what they're seeing doesn't match normal energy limits. Which means one thing. Mercedes might not just be faster. They might be operating in a space the rules didn't fully control. And now, just days before the Japanese Grand Prix, the FIA is watching closely. Because if this advantage is real, it could disappear overnight. But if it doesn't, then what Mercedes has built might already be untouchable. Subscribe now, because what happens in Suzuka could decide the entire season. Right after Australia, the reaction across the paddock was controlled. Almost calm. Because a strong start in a new regulation era is expected. One team gets it right earlier. Finds performance quicker. Builds an early advantage. That's normal. But this didn't feel normal. Because Mercedes didn't just win. They dominated every phase of the weekend. Qualifying. Race pace. Energy deployment. Everything looked too precise. And the gap made it even harder to ignore. Over 8/10 in qualifying. Not in the middle of the season. Not after months of development. Right at the beginning. At that point, you could still explain it. Better preparation. Better integration. A head start. But then China happened. And that explanation started to break. Because Shanghai is a completely different challenge. Long straights. Heavy braking zones. More opportunities to recover energy. A track where differences should shift. Where weaknesses should appear. But they didn't. Mercedes still controlled everything. Still managed the race. Still dictated the pace. And that's when the pattern became impossible to ignore. Because Ferrari wasn't slow. In the corners, they were right there. Competitive. Sometimes even matching Mercedes. But the moment both cars hit the straight, everything changed. Not slowly. Not gradually. Instantly. And more importantly, consistently. Lap after lap. Stint after stint. Which tells you something critical. This isn't just raw speed. It's repeatable behavior. And in Formula One, that's where the real questions begin. Because under these new regulations, energy is limited. You can't deploy everything for the entire straight. At some point, every car reaches the limit. Every car starts to fade. But Mercedes didn't. They kept accelerating. Even at the very end of the straight. Exactly where everyone else lost performance. And that's not something you overlook. That's something you study. Because when one team behaves differently under the same rules, there is always a reason. And that's where the new evidence starts to matter. Because engineers didn't just look at lap times. They looked deeper. Sector by sector. Data traces. Speed profiles. Energy usage. And what they found didn't follow the expected pattern. Because instead of dropping off, Mercedes maintained performance longer. Smoother. More controlled. Almost like the system was behaving differently under load. And that's where everything points to one place. The engine. Not in isolation. But in how it behaves under real conditions. When it's hot. When it's under pressure. When everything is pushed to the limit. Because that's where performance is truly defined. And that's exactly where the regulations were never fully tested. Which is why this situation has escalated so quickly. Because now, it's not just about being fast. It's about how that speed is being sustained. And whether that behavior exists inside a space the rules didn't fully close. And with Suzuka just days away, that question is about to be answered. And this is where the situation becomes even more serious. Because when engineers compared all the available data, they didn't just see an advantage. They saw a pattern that shouldn't exist. Because in a normal scenario, energy deployment follows a curve. Strong at the beginning of the straight, then gradually fading. Every car does it. Every team manages it differently. But the drop is always there. Except for Mercedes. Because their data shows something unusual. They're not just faster at the start. They're still accelerating. When others are already losing speed. And that changes everything. Because that final part of the straight is where races are decided. Where overtakes happen. Where gaps are created. And Mercedes owns that moment. Every single lap. Which is why this new evidence matters so much. Because it doesn't just show performance. It shows behavior that doesn't match the expected limits. And that leads to one critical question. How? Because if energy is limited, if deployment is capped, if every system is regulated, then how is Mercedes still finding performance? Exactly where others run out? And this is where the focus shifts completely. Away from aerodynamics, away from setup, into something much deeper. The internal behavior of the engine. Because what teams now believe is that this isn't just about how energy is deployed. It's about how the engine itself operates under stress, under heat, under sustained load. Because according to the analysis, there may be a change happening inside the system. A shift in how compression behaves when the engine reaches full operating temperature. And if that's true, then everything makes sense. Because higher effective compression means more efficiency. More efficiency means more usable energy. And more usable energy means you can keep deploying when everyone else has already stopped. Which explains the pattern. Which explains the consistency. Which explains why Mercedes looks untouchable at the end of every straight. But here's the part that makes this explosive. This behavior would not appear in standard tests. Not in cold conditions. Not in controlled environments. Only on track. Only when the engine is pushed to its limit. Which means one thing. If this is real, then Mercedes didn't just build a better car. They understood something the rules didn't fully control. And that's exactly why the FIA is now reacting. Because once that possibility is confirmed, it's no longer just a competitive advantage. It becomes a regulatory problem. One that needs to be closed. One that needs to be controlled. And one that could directly impact performance. Immediately. But here's where the tension reaches another level. Because Suzuka is not just another circuit. It's the perfect environment for this kind of behavior. Long, flowing corners. Sustained throttle. Continuous heat. Constant load. Exactly the conditions where this effect would be at its strongest. Which means one thing. If this advantage exists, Suzuka will amplify it. Make it visible. Impossible to ignore. And if that happens, then what we're about to see won't just confirm suspicions. It will force action. And when the FIA is forced to act, everything can change overnight. And this is where everything starts to turn against Mercedes. Because once new evidence becomes public, it doesn't stay technical. It becomes political. And in Formula One, that's where things escalate fast. Because now it's not just engineers looking at data. It's teams pushing the FIA. It's manufacturers demanding answers. It's pressure from every direction. Ferrari, Honda, Audi, all pointing at the same thing. All pushing for the same outcome. Clarity. And more importantly, control. Because if one team has found a way to gain performance in a gray area, then every other team is already behind. Not by tenths, by understanding. And that's the most dangerous gap in Formula One. Because you can develop speed, but you can't instantly develop knowledge. And that's why the reaction has been so aggressive. Because this isn't about catching Mercedes on track. It's about stopping the advantage at its source. Which is exactly why the FIA is now under pressure to act faster. Because the regulation change is already planned. Compression measured in cold and in hot conditions. Closing the exact gap teams believe Mercedes is using. But here's the problem. That change doesn't fully arrive yet. Not for Suzuka. Which creates a very dangerous window. Because Mercedes still has access to whatever advantage they've built. But now, everyone is watching. And that changes everything. Because the moment a team becomes the center of attention, every detail matters more. Every performance gain feels bigger. Every advantage feels suspicious. And that creates pressure inside the team. Because now they are not just racing. They are being judged. Every lap becomes a statement. Every straight becomes evidence. And that's where mistakes can happen. Not technical mistakes. Strategic ones. Because when you know you're being watched, you start to think differently. Do we push? Or do we hold back? Do we show everything? Or do we protect what we have? And that internal conflict is where tension grows. Especially heading into a track like Suzuka. Because Suzuka doesn't give you options. You either push, or you fall behind. There is no middle ground. High-speed corners demand commitment. Energy management must be perfect. There's no place to hide performance. Which means Mercedes faces a unique situation. If they push, they risk exposing everything. If they don't, they risk losing the race. And that's the dilemma no dominant team wants. Because for the first time this season, they are not fully in control of the situation. But here's the final twist. What if they push, and nothing happens? What if they arrive in Suzuka, under full scrutiny, with new evidence circulating, with every rival watching, and they're still dominant? Still pulling away on the straights, still controlling energy better than anyone else. Because if that happens, then the entire narrative changes. Because it would mean the advantage is real, not temporary, not fragile, not dependent on a single interpretation. It would mean Mercedes has built something deeper, something stronger, something that doesn't disappear under pressure. And that's when fear spreads across the grid. Because at that point, it's no longer about stopping Mercedes. It's about understanding how far ahead they already are. And Suzuka is where that truth becomes impossible to hide.